Okay. Do you want me to just take it over and see where it goes? No, I think. Sorry, I think that was too loud. Sorry, my bad. I scared everyone.
Thank you. I don't think I need it. What do I need?
Back up.
Testing. We have a mic for each side if there are questions to interact with Juan, and then he has a mic. Can I set it over here by you, John, and then you could pass it? And
I'm guessing. Or from up there? Okay. So yeah, I don't know. I don't have uh, like yeah, I don't know. I'll take it. Whatever you want me to take it, I'll take it. So if you have any questions about the sermon or about my work specifically, I'll be happy to share more about that. So yeah, I'll just open it up. If you have questions or comments from what you, I guess, interpret from the sermon of or your knowledge about the issue, I think I'll just do that and go ahead if you have any questions or comments.
So certainly the border issues are complex in reasons people come and also then what happens at the border. Some of the things we as a country cannot necessarily do is go into other countries and solve their problems, although I recognize that some of our policies are creating some of those problems. I guess my question is kind of like, I think everyone agrees that immigration policy is in need of reform. So I guess my question would be, what steps can we as a country take to solve some of the issues with immigration, border issues? And you know, in one way I think, okay, I'm not my country and I act independently, so what can I do? And I think you gave us some of that, but okay, so I'll leave it at that.
That's a great question, and I hope I had the answer. Uh, I'll just elaborate a little bit on yeah what I think. Um, I think yes, the U.S. has interfered in many different ways through politics or economics or through a lot of things. Um, and that has helped pushing people out of like their countries and their communities, and that's why I think they end up in this case here. But I think there has been kind of or the U.S. territory has been sold as a dream, the American dream. People coming in here because there's opportunities, because there's spaces, there's jobs, there's family. Some people have family here for I don't know how many years, um, and so it's difficult to sometimes for people it's difficult to understand that policies that U.S. policy has affected or is one of the reasons also why people migrate. There's I don't know mining companies or other kind of U.S. based companies that are going to different places and mining gold and all these kinds of things, and that is forcing people out of their own places, and that's something that we need to recognize and reckon with. Um, I think the other thing that I wanted to highlight from the sermon is that yes, this is an issue or this is something that is happening at the border, but people are here in your community. People are not just in Tucson or in the border towns in Nogales, all those places. No, people are here. People travel north. People are in Michigan, and I don't know all the states in the U.S. So it's not just localized issue or anything. No, immigrants are in all over the place. They have family in all over the place, and they are based in all over the place. And I think one of the things that I usually tell people is that get to know who is who in your community. And that's part, I think, also the reflection on the sermon. Get to know your neighbor, get to know them. By doing that, you might get to know a little bit more of the issue and ways that you can support them, because they're not foreign anymore. They're part of your communities, and they're your neighbors, and therefore there's something that you could do, not just in a policy changing kind of level, because that's one of the ways, yes, advocating or doing advocacy efforts to change policies, yeah, but I think there's more connections that need to happen locally for immigrants to be received, or for people to have the tools to support immigrants or to receive immigrants. I think one of the things that I missed to mention, and I had it on as something that I could add to my sermon, was also that I think immigration in the U.S., again, there's a lot of divisions and so on, but throughout history, immigration is, I think at this point in time, the connotation of the immigrant is a negative one. And I think that's clear, and people recognize that, and I'm sure you have that those thoughts maybe or know about that. But it hasn't been the case in throughout the U.S. history. I think if you are here, for instance, and if you're not a Native American, you have an immigration history in your families. So again, my reflection always when I talk about this is treat others as you hoped your families and your grandparents, parents, and so on and so forth were treated. Because if they were treated harshly, you wouldn't want that for your own family. So again, when you're interacting with others, think about that. My family has a history of immigration, and so I need to recognize that. I'm not originally from this country or whatever, and I think that's something important to recognize. And so I think the other thing is that immigration policies are applied or are put in place not in a holistic way, but just as a response to something that is happening in the social political context in the country. So the first Immigration Act was the Chinese Exclusion Act. The first act enacted or law related to immigration was to exclude a group of people. So again, the nature of immigration law is not to comprehend the issues that people are going through. Is not understanding why people migrate, the root cause. It's not based on that. It's based on kind of tackling a issue that we are having and kind of put just a Band-Aid on top of it, or responding to something instead of creating a system that supports everyone that have a need or wishes to come to the U.S. So again, the Chinese Exclusion Act, and that was, I think, 1880 something. I don't remember exactly the date, but at that time in history, it was when in the U.S. they were building or constructing the railroad. And so before the Chinese Act was enacted, the U.S. was inviting people from Chinese descent to come here and to work in the railroad, the construction of the railroad. But once something was achieved, the railroad was constructed, then they didn't want for people that came here to bring their families or even to come. So those people that work here on a specific field that did work for the U.S. were sent back and were banned to come back to the U.S. for 10 years. That was the first immigration law act or enacted here in the U.S. And so again, immigration law has always been reacting to something that is happening and usually puts people on a tough spot, because usually it's restricting instead of granting access or modifying the things that have not worked at all in the past. So I think that's also another thing to know, that there's two notions in the U.S. in terms of immigration. Sometimes immigration is good when they come and help and serve our purpose. But when we are done with that area, they need to go back. Go back to their places. When they come and work on the corn season here in Ohio or in Michigan or in Indiana, immigrants are welcome. They need the workers, and they have professional workers doing that. But once the corn season is done, they need to go back. So again, we get beneficiated in terms of economics, but then when that purpose is fulfilled, then we don't want to get anything to do with them or with that issue. So again, those are just some of my thoughts, and yeah. Any others?
Some years ago, I had a chance to take a trip down south. And I went with a friend of mine, and I said to her I'd stay up in the room. Well, the girl came in, and she was from Colombia, and she was making the beds. And I said to her, I introduced myself, and I said to her, I'll help you. Oh, no, I get in trouble. I said, no, you won't, because nobody's going to know it but you and I. But she was working 2 jobs aside of that one to keep her children. But I think the problem is people would stop judging people by their outside. You know what I mean? Accept them like Christ accepts us. We're all equal. We're all the same. God doesn't look at any of us different than the other. It just doesn't. And that a lot of it's man's own doing, really. Yeah, I know what you're saying about them working, though.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. I think also, like, as any other groups, like immigrants has been stigmatized, and again, there's preconceptions about immigrants, and that's something, again, crossing a barrier or destroying like this wall that was presented to us by, I don't know, our society, basically. I think that's really important, and I think it's important to get in contact with folks because there's a lot of fear. I think if there's something that has defined, for instance, my own experience, I'm a legal resident of the US, but I immigrated. 2 things maybe. One thing is I mentioned that immigration requires a lot of resources. So this is not, and people say, why don't you get a visa or access a visa to come here? That is extremely difficult. That's the first thing. And the other thing is that you need to pay for medical tests and stuff like that for you to be able to come here. Then you need to go to an interview at the embassy. You need to pay to go to do that. And then you come here, for instance, in my case, and I need to continue filling forms and paying fees. So again, I think the extension of what I've paid is over $10,000 since I got here. And so again, immigration is for people that have resources too. And for instance, for people that come for any reason through the border and want to cross and sometimes do so illegally, it's not that they come free of charge. They leave their countries and they have to go through smugglers and drug traffickers or, I don't know, people traffickers. I don't know, what's the name? Human traffickers, yes,
Yeah.
thank you. Through human traffickers and so on, and they need to pay fees. So a trip, for instance, from someone from Guatemala to come here is about $8,000. So there are people that have this, I don't know, huge needs in their own communities. How are they going to gather $8,000 for someone to make the trip? And the other thing, the only component is that families are being separated and destroyed because they're sending just one person, that maybe one person has a chance to cross and to make a living and to send back money to their home communities. So families get together and they gather $8,000 and they pay, but no one grants them that this person is going to cross. One, if he's going to survive the trip. One, if it's going to be enough money for the person to cross. So again, immigration is about resources. And we, again, often forget like those kinds of things. And on the other side, on the flip side of that, is that the people still do that. They're so desperate. They're living in harsh conditions created by their own governments, by the influence of the US and policies of the US, by many things. And again, they're still so desperate that they gather that money however they can, selling everything they can, and they leave their families behind, and then they travel. And historically, like man has been the one, or the head of the family has been the one that often makes the trip. But so often, like more and more recently, we have seen children and women doing that trip as well. So again, why would you put yourself through all of that just because you want to come and that's it? No, there's reasons behind that. And I think people, again, often forget that there's a reasoning why people leave. And again, it's not free. And again, they have to travel on that train for many days and many weeks even. Or sometimes the smugglers that you pay will take you to a different place that is not the place that you wanted to go to. Or sometimes they take you to the border crossing and they just leave you there by yourself and you need to figure out what to do. So again, it's just like many things that that happen and that people need to face. And again, U.S. policy affects that, affects the way people leave things and people need to go through things. I was going to say something, but I kind of forgot. Oh, yes. The U.S. policy also says, I think I showed the map of migrant deaths in the desert. So we're not just using law and policies and like people or border patrol, law enforcement, not just policing. We are using our natural resources as a deterrent for people to come, because people are dying in the desert. So the U.S. and specifically, there's the law says that the desert is going to be used as a deterrent for people, a natural deterrent for people to come. And so again, that's also kind of, I don't know, mind-blowing for me, that the nature is being used by us to stop people from coming. And again, people are dying. But the surprising thing to me also is the resilience of the human nature. And people, I think I didn't show that graphic there, but even though people are dying in the desert, people continue to make the trip. Because again, there's other things behind us that we are doing the trip for. And even though people are dying, they continue to do the traveling. And sometimes they cross the border, and it's not that you cross the border and that's it, you go to the town right there. No, you need to walk 1 day, 2 days, 3 days, 4 days, 5 days, 10 days in the desert. And you need to figure out how to survive in the desert. And so again, I think the other thought or picture that we have is about the border wall, and that the border wall is extending miles and miles in the desert and yeah, across the border. And I think that's also like a wrong image. I think that border wall that we often see is usually close to border towns, where there's population, because that's the first kind of deterrent of people like crossing, or the first way, a physical barrier for people not to cross. But I think also, like back in the time, the stories that we hear is that like that barrier affected the economy between the two countries. Because I live in the US, or I live in Mexico, and I had family on the other side of the border. And so those relationships became, someone got there, those relationships that I had with my family in the other side. And now it's illegal for you because you don't have a visa, even though historically my family has passed from one and moved from one side to the other. But now I can go to visit my dad, my aunt, or my grandmother, because it's illegal. So again, yeah, there's a lot of stories I can share.
So you just brought up the maps that you showed us earlier with the GPS coordinates. Of course, all of those are on our side of the border. Are there estimates of number of people dying on this trip through Mexico?
I don't have the statistics, but I think usually what they do, their closest border like towns on the Mexico side. On the U.S. side, you have like Nogales or Douglas in Arizona. That is the border crossing that we usually go through when we do learning tours. So you have these big like crossing points. But again, I think on the Mexico side, that there's more between those crossing towns. There's more like little towns, and so people don't have to go through desert. They just go to a town that is close to the border and travel. But on the U.S. side, there's no those small like towns in between, like one side or the other, because the desert kind of is there, and the cities like Tucson is 2 hours from the Douglas, Arizona. That is the border crossing.
So My question was more along the lines of you said like in 2017 or 18, there were like 128 deaths. Are there estimates about how many deaths are on the Mexico side of the border from people traveling on the beast?
I don't think there's statistics because there's no organizations that are tracking that or putting their eye on that. On the U.S. side, there's one that is called Humane Borders, and they're actively tracking that. Or the artist that I mentioned, his name is Álvaro Enciso. He's actually from Colombia, but he came to the U.S. I don't know many years ago, and he fought one, I think in Vietnam or something like that. And then he went back to Arizona, and he said, yeah, my purpose in life is to go and track these dots, track this GPA location, set across in there. And so there's no one doing that on the Mexican side. But again, the trip is really hard. And so, for instance, I mentioned the train, and I don't want to be too blunt sometimes when I tell stories. But for instance, specifically for women, is a really dangerous trip. And if you're women and you go on this trip and on this train, you are probably going to be sexually assaulted. And so again, those are the conditions. It's not again, and people do the trip. So again, that's for us to understand. Even through hardship, people do the trip because they have the need. That's kind of. Sorry? Yeah.
I have two questions, Juan. The first one is about the broader Mennonite church, because I think you have a little bit more of a broader perspective than I do, and maybe than many of us. But I'm just curious, in the last few years, it feels like the rhetoric has gotten hotter and hotter about anti-immigration, but also some people responding and saying we have to treat people with dignity. And so I just was curious, from your perspective, as you travel to churches and work more broadly with the denomination, do you see the Mennonite church, like, are you concerned that the compassion for immigrants has been a little compromised by a lot of nationalistic rhetoric and fear-mongering, or has it been more like it's moved a little the other way? Like if people are going to dehumanize anyone who comes to the border, the Mennonite church needs to like really step in there. So do you feel like there's been movement, or has it all kind of evened out?
I think I'll say it depends on where the Mennonite churches are physically. Mm-hmm. Because I would say, for instance, in more, again, remote places, I think people will be led on by the rhetoric that is kind of around. But again, in ports of entry or churches that are closer to the ports of entry, I think there's more like awareness of like what's going on and how the immigration system is affecting not just immigrants, but like the people from the U.S. trying to work or trying to do like different stuff. So it's not just about immigration; it's just about general awareness about your context, I would say. So again, for instance, in New York City, it's a port of entry. New York City or all the international airports, those are ports of entry. So again, New York City, a lot of people come through that port of entry. And so again, the Mennonite churches in there try to be aware of that, mm-hmm. and try to put programming out to support immigrants or to provide legal assistance as needed, or again, food, clothing, mm-hmm. because sometimes people come here without anything. So I think I would say like that's kind of the answer, but I've been eager, if you will, I've been eager because we have been contacted often more and more for Mennonite churches saying, hey, we would like to talk more about this issue. And is sometimes when we introduce like a Borderlands learning tour, it's taking 5 days or a week out of your life to go to a different place. Sometimes that's not the best way to do things. But I think I've been encouraged by receiving more phone calls. Hey, we're interested in this thing. We're interested in this subject, and that gives me hope.
Yeah.
That people are calling, are reaching out, and again that we are able to resource them. this upcoming November 7th to the 14th, we're doing the first in-person learning tour after this time of COVID-19, or during still, with the church leaders from the region. So we are going to take church leaders from the Baptist and Mennonite congregations here in the Great Lakes region, and we're going to take them to the border. And yeah, we have I think it's 11 people, 11 pastors or conference ministers that they're interested in doing that. And that's another way that we affect change, basically, by taking people. I'm not going, of course, but I know that the people in charge right now are more than capable of doing that. I'm doing all the backward, and I'm doing all the conversations and emails and all of that, but it's going to be, again, a great experience. And it's not just the Mennonite Church, but the Brother in Christ Church and other denominations that are interested, and I would say historically have been more, they have hesitated more about talking about immigration, for instance.
Okay.
I think I mentioned it on the sermon, but the matter of language, I think that's a really important thing, and that's something that maybe communities can do more, is one, being able to maybe speak another language, so people, because a lot of misunderstanding are just language, that people don't understand what you're sharing or the idea, even though you have the best intentions, sometimes people don't understand what you're telling them. Or so again, have an interpreter or have something to know the language, or you study yourself like another language. And again, it's not just an issue of English or in Spanish. Right now, people from Haiti are arriving to the border. You need to know Creole or French to be able to interact with them. I met people from Russia, from Romania, from all different countries in Africa, DRC, South Africa. Yeah, many countries that gathered there. Is not just Spanish. And the other component is, for instance, when people travel from specific places in rural areas, for instance, in Guatemala or Mexico, they're indigenous people and they don't even speak Spanish. They speak indigenous language. So again, it becomes a thing of is indigenous to Spanish to English, and yeah, it's just. So again, interpreters or people that can interact with folks, I think that's a great way that people can get involved and engage with the subject. And again, people that when you speak them in their language, I think you just feel the difference.
This is a rough question, but I want to know, what are some of the common answers you give to it? So we hear about the fear-mongering that people say, oh, well, we have too many people coming across the border, it's increasing this, I'm afraid of this and this and this. And I am of the mindset a lot of that is fear-mongering. But one of the guys I just worked with recently lives in one of the border towns in Texas and Mexico, and was telling me that since the change in administration, how things have changed in his border town. And it's not fear-mongering, it's what he's experiencing. But knowing some of the truth of that, and then hearing what I would consider more fear-mongering up here, what are some of the answers you give when people say, well, but with the immigration comes comes increased crime, or comes increased this? Because we do know that some of that is true. We know that with human trafficking does come with the ability to transfer drugs, they can then do that, and you can earn your way across, and that's dangerous for us, but it allows the person who needs hope to get across the border. So there's fear-mongering we don't. How do you respond to people when they are talking to you about that? This is what you're doing with your career. You're trying to help make this better. And then they come to you to say, yes, but it's bad for our country for these reasons. Like, how do you answer that question?
I think that's a tough one. But again, when they're people from churches, they respond very well if you start the conversation from a biblical perspective or more a Christian-based, I think, answer. And that's the first thing that I go to. So when I present kind of biblical verses and these kinds of things, people start to start the conversation. The second one is, these people are coming and taking our jobs and all these kinds of things. One of the things that I do is, what kind of jobs are they taking away from people? And I think that sometimes it's hard when people get asked that question, because I think historically the jobs that people take are the jobs that people in the US are not willing to do. And so again, it's kind of, thinking about that. So for instance, the RV companies in Goshen, that's kind of the biggest thing, RV companies in Goshen, or in Indiana in Elkhart County. And so they're desperate for people to work. They don't have labor force because people here in the US don't want to do the work, and so they ended up bringing immigrants, legal immigrants, to work and to take those jobs because they don't want them, or they, for this reason or another, they don't want kind of the jobs. And I think the other thing that cracks me up is, again, we are living again, a globalized economy. And the idea of capitalism, for instance, in this case, is to pay less for a product. So why are you complaining for hiring people that are doing the job for less if that's what the economy is doing, or that's how it works, right? Isn't that how economy nowadays is working? You try to pay the cheapest for and get more. And so again, sometimes through it depends, really depends on the person. And I like to use a lot of sarcasms or not answer questions sometimes. Questions. So I'm good asking questions sometimes, like, what do you mean about this? What do you mean about that? But kind of leading the conversation to or channeling the conversation, or the different perspective, because some perspective. And again, that's why we do work I do, to see if I can affect some kind of change in someone's perspective. And my goal when I enter this conversation is not convincing the other one. I think that's the first thing, because some people get altered, really altered when you try to tell them right and one's not. So again, you need to be really, really strategic on how to address a conversation. And you need to know what you're talking about. And you need to do your research. You need to do your homework. If you don't do that and just take, I think sometimes we a subject just to say, I know something about this, and we really don't. And so again, immerse yourself in a subject that you really want to talk about. And I think that would be kind of one of my answers. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Thanks for the question. I appreciate that. Any others? I don't know if there's a time frame or anything.
So I think one of the questions that's in my mind is, we talk about, so policy change needs to happen, but that's a process that takes forever. And it's not like someone's going to say, oh, I hear the US is talking about changing their policy, I'm going to wait to try to migrate until that's done. So you still have the stream of people coming. You still have the people who are detained at the border. You still have the people who are in the country, whether illegally or legally, who are stereotyped against and stigmatized. So I guess I struggle with knowing what I as one person can do and what we should be doing. And I don't know what the answer to that is. I don't know if there is one answer, but just sort of remembering the larger context and remembering that there are people who are living their life and that you're talking about their livelihood. I don't know what else I'm going to say, so I'm going to stop talking.
Thanks for your question again, and I think we have this kind of weird democratic sense, or it has been kind of I don't know, imposed maybe to us that things take a long time through the democratic way of doing things, and I think we need to somehow make a shift to that understanding, because I do think that through that process, or the democratic process, we can affect change individually and as groups and whatever. I do think that's a really valid and important option. Or do advocacy work, for instance. I do think I think my answer would be maybe it's a combination of things. It's not just one thing. I think if you want to somehow create impact in your specific context, you need to do a combination of things. So the democratic kind of path is one, yes. But again, this thing in inviting me and for me to be able to share that knowledge, I hope, or is my hope, from this. And so now you know something else that you didn't know before. And so again, that, and you're open to that, because I think that's the other component. When people are not looking for these kinds of conversations, well, they're going to avoid them all their lives. So again, when you kind of make room at some point or do an exit to kind of see if you can be introduced to something else, that's kind of, so it's your personal choice to know something else.
Which one any better?
Give me a second. I think I have a second part of the answer. I think again, okay. Is this working? Yeah. I think the second part of the answer is, again, get to know the place that you're at, get to know your community. I think there's a lot of organizations that you do kind of mapping exercises to know who's where and who is in this community. And by knowing that, you know, if people are coming here, immigrants, for instance, or it could be, they could be here for years and years and years, and you just don't know them, because that's not a community that you share time with. And so get closer to them, talk to them, see what they need. It could be, again, it could be your neighbor. It could be your next door, literally your next door neighbor, and you are not willing to go and say hello and interact with that person. I think though it's basic, but people sometimes they don't think about that. They just don't. They take things for granted, and I think sometimes a lot of our culture here in the U.S. is taking things for granted, and I think we need to be more, again, strategic about how we think, or again, breaking the divides or breaking this stereotype kind of thinking that we often have about others. If you don't get closer to others, how are you going to know if you fear others? Why do you fear them? I think is the first question. Is that something that happened to you or happened to your family, or is that you heard at school that this story happened and that's why you don't trust? So questioning what you know and what you get into. Yeah, I think that's my answer. I think there was another question.
I think as a culture, we have become more self-centered. All you got to do is look at how many selfies we take as opposed to photographs of other people. Okay. Now, the other question I had, do these immigrants feel that the worst situation in the United States is still better than the situation that they're currently in their country?
I'll answer the second one. Is they don't know that the situation is this bad here. They think that they're going to get to a place. I think the first thing is they think that they're going to get to family, and seeing family is always a good thing. But again, they're not. Sometimes they don't watch news. They don't wake up in the morning, get a coffee, and turn on the TV or the radio and hear about everything. No, they don't know that. Just an example of that. A person was coming and was going to cross the border, and the smuggler in this case told the person, New York is just over that mountain. So once you cross into the U.S., you need to run there because New York is beyond that. So again, there's just no information. You don't have the you're not informed. It's not a travel agency. The smuggler is not a travel agency that is going to lay out all your plans. You're going to go this and you're going to do that. No, they just take the people wherever they want to take the people. Sometimes they just drop them in a place and they need to figure out what to do. It's not informed. It's not an informed trip. So that's one of the things. And they may not have information about how things are happening in here because, again, they think I'm just going to be with family. I think the first thing that you said is I think the U.S. has like I don't know, I have the sense coming from Colombia, again, that is very self-centered, or people here are very self-centered. And again, we are more, and maybe you are, but in a different way, family-based. So we like to have our families close. And I think if we need to go out of a limb to help someone from our family and sacrifice our interests or our interest on doing something, we'll do that for family. And I think that's another kind of sense. Depending on the culture, I think you are closer or you are more self. But I think I also have learned that even though I had that stereotype, you can say, before, I think I found a lot of people here that are really not. There are people from the U.S. that they're really friendly and, I don't know, they love everyone and they engage with everyone and they try to help everyone as much as they can, and I think I found myself there. Yes. Mm-hmm.
Well, okay, there we go. I was just curious, as you've worked with other churches in this region of the States, what have you seen churches our size kind of be doing, like banding together and doing that, if they decide they want to make a commitment to helping, just curious, like what we could do given our, 40 or 50 people that come on a Sunday usually?
I think, again, there's a lot, and there's a variety of things that churches do. For instance, some of them are creating, I don't know, like Mission Month, but to know about a specific subject. And so they invite folks that know from a specific subject, immigration or other anti-racism that you were talking about that with the book. So you invite people that for a specific period of time can do and learn and study like those kinds of things. I think that's one of the things. In terms of specifically immigration, there's many things that I think churches can do. There's a movement right now, and again, sometimes these get politicized a little bit, but there's sanctuary churches. So again, there's Mennonite churches in the U.S. that have become sanctuary churches, basically saying that if someone comes here illegally or for X or Y reason they ended up being here, that the churches are going to protect them from the outside world, basically. But again, there's a process that churches need to go through, and there's kind of series of workshops in order for you to be able to become a sanctuary church. But that's one of the things that churches do. I think, for instance, in places that there's detention centers close by, churches have like visitation programs. So they go and visit folks, inmates, and if they have any kind of need, like they'll help them with that, but also kind of like pastoring or mentorship, kind of, because that's important, but also through funds. So again, what people often don't know, for instance, for a person that is seeking asylum, they will come to the US, they're going to be detained, they're going to be processed, and they're going to be sent to a detention center. It's not that people cross the border and they deported back to, like that's not something that happens very often nowadays. Like they have to go through a specific they're charged because they crossed the border. So they now have a criminal kind of case. And so they're processed and they're then deported. But some of them, when they're claiming asylum, for instance, they have to go to jail, and there's two options. You can be released to a family member or someone that sponsors you, or you can stay and fight your court case, for instance, or your asylum case, being in the detention center. But for people to be able to get out, the bail that immigration system puts on people is around $10,000 to $20,000 for one person. And so again, there's churches that are setting up bail funds to be able to gather some money. And again, at the end, if the person is granted the asylum case or not, the funds are usually returned to the person who donated the funds. So again, they're creating kind of a rotary fund bail money. But again, that's a process, and that's a way that the church can go, or there's other ways that I think church can do with that. I think also if the church has knowledge or has contact with, again, immigration organizations here, or I don't know how, I'm not very connected to this area, to be honest, but in Goshen, for instance, we have the National Immigrant Justice Center, and we have other partners that we work through, kind of gathering information about what are the needs. And sometimes needs are food or clothing or other kinds of things. So we have a material resource center, MCC. And through material resources, we donate specific kind of things to groups of people that we know. But for instance, that's connecting to maybe a mapping exercise. If you're connected to an organization here that work with immigrants, then that's a natural connection. You can say, hey, what do you need? We have this available. Or what is the need that you have? We might be able to help out through funds or through other ways. So kind of building relationships, I think that's very important. And doing networking, I hear here in the community, that's something that you can do and the churches can do very easily, because again, you have natural connections here in the neighborhood and in town and all of that. I think there's a it could be both ways. It could be an organization that is working with immigrants, or again, could be people saying like, hey, this is my situation. But for them to be able to do that, there's a relationship that needs to be built. So I think building relationship is kind of the first connection. If you have a neighbor and you go and talk to the person, and it might take a while for them to open up and say anything about their legal status, or they're not going to mention anything about their legal status. So again, that's also a little bit difficult, and sometimes through organizations or partners that you have that are working with immigration related issues already, sometimes it's easier to support them because they know what they're doing and what they're dealing with, and especially when they're doing legal services, they know the specific needs that specific families have. Or also donating, that's also another way, donating to organizations here in the community or organizations that you may know that are doing this kind of work, or any other kind of work, anti-racism and so on.
I have 3 comments based upon some of the stuff you've said. Not really a question, sorry, but Roger was asking about, coming up here, and is the worst thing here better than what was back home? There was a book that College of Worcester students were supposed to read at one point called Enrique's Journey. Talks about somebody making the trip from Central America up to the border and why he came. His mother was already here, and so he was wanting to reconnect with his mother. So if you're interested, that's a great book, I think, to read to understand that journey from there to here and some of the reasons why. Second comment, just south of us, 2 blocks south of us, are over 300 international students. Most of them, well, all of them would be documented and here legally. There are some DACA students, I think. I don't know because we don't really get into that, but so there are probably some undocumented students here. But even the documented ones, the ones who are here legally, can sometimes feel like they're not wanted. I had a Vietnamese student who I was working with on independent study, and she said to me, I feel like I'm not wanted here in this country. And so I had to speak to that somehow. And it's just sad that even students who are here legally are picking up on, they don't want me here. The other one was on drug dealing. And I've begun to think of drug dealing in a new light a little bit. If I think about it, what is the reason drugs are crossing the border? It's because there's demand here. And going back to your comment about capitalism, the drug dealers are just making a living for their families in some sense. Now, we know some of them are really bad people, but, still, if there weren't the demand here, there wouldn't be a trade in it.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I agree with that. And you mentioned books. I brought a lot of resources, and not. I think specifically this one I like. It's called Christians at the Border: Immigration, the Church, and the Bible, by Daniel Carroll. And again, this is really powerful, and again, can provide you with, a series of Sunday school, or a Sunday school series just to analyzing this book. And again, is how, from a perspective of faith, we should be addressing immigration. There's one that I think is more, It provokes a lot of conversation, but it's called Our God is Undocumented. And again, it's kind of the story of Jesus and kind of comparing that to nowadays. How would that be? And again, that Jesus himself was an immigrant, and he was chased and away and stuff like that, and he was stigmatized and all, so on and so forth. But again, that's another great resources for Christian churches. These two, we usually meet actually with the author of this book. His name is Todd Miller, and he lives in Tucson, and he writes books related to immigration. So this one is called Storming the Wall: Climate Change, Migration, and Homeland Security. And so again, it's another perspective from a climate change perspective, what is happening at the border. Because what he's been looking at in others is, for instance, that having physical border walls is also affecting the migration of fauna. So again, animals are no longer able to cross their natural path as they were doing before. So again, they're actually reaching this extinction, and some of the species, because they're not able to migrate to lay eggs or to have cubs, or they're not able to do that basically because there's a physical border wall, and they're being forced to do another route that is not natural to them. Or again, related to water. So there's like rivers that they have had to move around or close down basically because there's a border wall, a concrete barrier that the river cannot go through. Or sometimes it goes through and turns down the wall. So again, there's a climate component on that. And I think he has another one that is called Border Patrol Nation. So again, it's related to law enforcement and how law enforcement is so deeply rooted in our society, and how to look at that from an immigration perspective a little bit more. So those are great resources. And again, I think I also forget to mention that, but I'm saying Welcoming the Stranger, and all these kinds of things and experience. But I do think and I do recognize that there are people that are, as any place, that don't come here with the best intentions. And again, it's not something that just happened for people that come from the outside. In our communities, there's people that do bad things. And so it's recognizing that that's something natural. But again, it gets more advertised because it's when you want to have a group of people or stigmatize a group of people, it's easier to do those kinds of things. So I think that's the. I think again, last one is fear. I think if you are an illegal immigrant, or if you are a legal immigrant, you have a constant sense of fear. I have a constant sense of fear, even though I'm a legal permanent resident, because at any point the policies can change and they can send me back to Colombia, and I will lose my family that I have here. So again, just think about that. Think about, and some people don't. There's a privilege of being, again, of course, a U.S. citizen. But thinking about police, I think the first month that I was here, I was scared all the time of driving because I was pretty sure that I was going to be pulled over by a police officer, and that somehow that was going to end up in deportation or something. Even though I'm a legal permanent resident and I came here through a visa process and all of that, even though you come legally or through legal means, you have a sense of fear. You are scared of this context, and we need to work more again on welcoming the stranger and how we are interacting with people. Thank you. I really appreciate the invitation, Kim. Thank you for the invitation, and thank you for the conversation, and to everyone for engaging in this matter. And again, I'm a resource, and I can send resources through Kim or through anyone and continue the conversation. 4 hours. I need to get cracking. Thank you. Yeah, we're really excited. Yeah, absolutely. I will do. I'll do that. Absolutely. I think it was just like for me a curious. I don't know. I think about connections and how things are connected somehow. And so when Kim told me that her son was also expecting, and it was November 19th, I was like, oh my gosh, all these babies. Around this time, we have another friend that is due, I think, November 4th. We have another friend that is January 20th. I don't know. It's baby season. I didn't want to say that.